The station was massive, stood at the viewport and stared at the structure that stretched across the darkness of space like a metal city. This was the heart of the Galactic Assembly, home to 847 different species. And today, humanity was joining them. "It's bigger than I expected," said beside him. She pressed her hand against the glass, her eyes wide. "I've seen the photos, but this is something else." "Everything about this is something else," muttered from behind them. The military commander had his arms crossed, his face showing the same careful expression he always wore when meeting new people. "Stay sharp. We don't know how they'll receive us." Stepped forward, smoothing down her diplomatic uniform. "They invited us. That's what matters. We're here to make a good impression." Their shuttle docked with the central hub 20 minutes later. The airlock hissed open, and they stepped into a corridor filled with beings that looked nothing like humans. Some walked on 4 legs. Others floated. One creature appeared to be made entirely of crystal, its body refracting light into rainbow patterns across the walls. A tall, thin alien approached them. Its skin was pale blue, and it had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on its face. "Welcome to the assembly," it said in perfect English, though its mouth didn't move. The words came from a translator device on its chest. "I am your guide. Please follow me." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Everywhere looked, he saw alien species conducting business, talking in languages that sounded like music or grinding metal or rushing water. Some of them stopped to stare at the humans. Others ignored them completely. "Your application has been approved," said as they walked. "You have been granted provisional membership status. This means you will have limited voting rights and access to basic assembly resources." "Limited?" asked. "All new species begin this way. It is tradition. You must prove yourselves worthy of full membership." 3 eyes blinked in sequence. "It typically takes between 2 and 3 centuries." Exchanged glances with centuries. They had expected years, maybe decades, but centuries. "What exactly do we need to prove?" asked, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady. "That you can contribute to the assembly, that you can follow our laws, that you can coexist with species very different from yourselves." Stopped before a large door. "The council will explain your first assignments." The council chamber was circular and enormous. Beings of all shapes and sizes sat in tiered rows that rose up toward a domed ceiling. At the center, 3 figures sat on elevated platforms. These were the representatives of the elder races, the species that had founded the assembly 12,000 years ago. The middle figure spoke. Its voice was deep and resonated through the chamber even without a translator. "Humanity, you are young. Your civilization has existed for only a few thousand years. You have much to learn." Felt tense beside him but stepped forward calmly. "We are here to learn and to contribute," she said. "Good." The figure on the left leaned forward. Its body was covered in dark scales. "You will be assigned to mining operations in Sector 7. The work is difficult but necessary. You will also patrol the border regions," the third figure added. This one looked almost like a bird, with feathers that shimmered green and gold. "Pirates and raiders operate there. The assembly has limited resources to dedicate to these areas." Understood immediately. They were being given the jobs nobody else wanted. The dangerous work, the tedious work, the work in forgotten corners of space where the glory was minimal and the risk was high. "We accept," said without hesitation. The months that followed were harder than anyone had expected. The mining operations in Sector 7 were in asteroid fields where radiation levels were dangerous and the equipment constantly broke down. But Earth's chief engineer looked at the failing machines and saw opportunities. "This design is inefficient," he told his team as they stood in the cramped maintenance bay of the mining station. "We can improve it." "We're supposed to just maintain what's here," one of the workers said. "They said mine, they didn't say how," grinned. Let's show them what humans can do. Within 3 months, the human mining teams had increased output by 40%. They redesigned the extraction equipment, optimized the processing systems, and developed new safety protocols that reduced accidents to nearly zero. The other species working at the station watched in surprise as humans turned a failing operation into the most productive mining facility in assembly space. On the border, things were different. Admiral Jin commanded the small human fleet assigned to patrol duties. The ships were old, hand-me-downs from other species that had moved on to newer models. The sectors they patrolled had been plagued by pirates for decades. Why haven't they dealt with this before? One of Jin's captains asked during a strategy meeting. Because it's not worth their time, Jin replied. These are poor colonies, low-value trade routes. The elder races don't see the profit in protecting them. But people live here. Exactly. Jin pulled up the tactical map. So we're going to do what they won't. We're going to make these spaces safe. The human fleet moved through the border sectors with determination. They didn't have the weapons or the fastest ships, but they had something else. They cared. When pirates attacked a cargo vessel, human ships responded within minutes. When a colony called for help, humans came. It took 8 months to clear out the major pirate strongholds. The human fleet hunted them down systematically, offering captured pirates the choice of trial or exile. Most chose exile. Word spread quickly that the border sectors were no longer easy targets. Was working on something different. As a trade negotiator, she traveled to struggling colonies that the Assembly had written off as economically unviable. She sat with local leaders, studied their resources, and found connections no one else had bothered to look for. You have minerals that the need, she told the leader of a small agricultural world. They have fertilizer technology you could use. I can set up a direct trade route. The Assembly said we were too far from major trade lanes, the leader said skeptically. The Assembly wasn't looking hard enough, smiled, trust me. Within a year, she had established trade routes that connected 17 colonies. Worlds that had been isolated suddenly had markets for their goods and access to resources they needed. The colonies prospered, and humanity gained a reputation as problem solvers. Back on the assembly station, met with to review humanity's progress. Your species is efficient, the alien admitted, more efficient than we anticipated. We're just doing the work assigned to us, said. Yes, but you do it better than expected. 3 eyes studied him carefully. The elder races are taking notice. Should have heard the warning in those words. He should have understood that being noticed by the powerful wasn't always a good thing. But at that moment, he only felt pride. Humanity was proving itself. They were making a difference. He didn't know yet that making a difference was exactly what would get them into trouble. The elder races had ruled the assembly for 12,000 years. They had seen countless young species come and go, some rising to respectability, most fading into obscurity. But none had risen as quickly as humanity. None had been so capable, so willing, so dangerous to the established order. In private chambers, the elder races began to talk, not about humanity's contributions, about humanity's threat, about what would happen if these newcomers continued to rise at this unprecedented pace. The humans worked on, unaware of the storm gathering above them. 5 years had passed since humanity joined the assembly, and everything had changed. Not just for humans, but for the entire galactic community. The species that had once given humanity the worst jobs now depended on them to keep those jobs running. Jin stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display. The outer rim stretched before him, a vast region of space that the assembly had always considered expendable. Dozens of colonies dotted the area, too far from the core worlds for the elder races to care about, too valuable to the people living there to abandon. Admiral were receiving distress calls from 3 separate colonies, his communications officer reported. They are attacking again. Jin had learned to hate They weren't a civilization in any traditional sense. They were a swarm, millions of small creatures that traveled through space in vast clouds, consuming everything biological in their path. For centuries, they had been a problem in the outer rim. The Assembly's solution had been to evacuate colonies when they approached and reclaim the territory later. Not this time, Jin said. Deploy the fleet, full defensive formation. His officers moved with practiced efficiency. The human fleet had grown over the years, not with hand-me-down ships anymore, but with vessels they had built themselves. They weren't the biggest ships in assembly space, but they were fast, well-armed, and crewed by people who actually cared about protecting the colonies they defended. The battle lasted 47 days. They came in waves, their numbers seeming endless. Human ships held the line, fighting constantly, rotating crews to prevent exhaustion but never retreating. They lost 3 ships and 216 people, but the colonies survived. When it was over, Jin sent his report to the Assembly Council. He expected recognition, perhaps gratitude. What he got was a brief acknowledgement and a question about why he had expended so many resources defending low-priority territories. Low priority, Jin muttered, staring at the message. 200,000 people live in those colonies. They don't see it that way, his first officer said quietly. To them, it's just numbers and resource allocation. Then they see it wrong. Far from the outer rim was dealing with a different kind of crisis. The blight had been ravaging the colonies for 60 years. It was a disease that attacked neural tissue, causing paralysis and death within months. They had spent fortunes trying to find a cure, but their best scientists had failed. Had been studying the blight for 3 years. She worked in a small laboratory on a human research station, often alone, sometimes joined by a handful of assistants who shared her obsession with solving unsolvable problems. I think I have it, she announced one morning, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had been awake for 36 hours straight, running simulations and cross-referencing genetic data. The blight isn't a virus or a bacteria. It's a prion, but a synthetic one. Someone made this. Made it, her assistant asked. Why? I don't know, maybe a weapon that got loose. Maybe an experiment gone wrong. But if it's synthetic, we can unmake it. She pulled up her data. I need to test this on live samples. The testing took another 4 months. Every trial brought them closer. Every failure taught them something new. And finally, in a small lab on a station orbiting a star whose name humans couldn't pronounce, created the cure. She distributed it freely to the medical facilities. Millions of lives would be saved. She expected gratitude, celebration, recognition. What she received was silence. They accepted the cure, implemented it across their colonies, and never acknowledged where it came from. To them, it was simply what should have happened, what they were owed. They didn't even say thank you, her assistant said, staring at the empty message queue. I noticed, replied. She felt something cold settling in her chest, a realization she didn't want to acknowledge. But we didn't do it for thanks. We did it because it was right. She believed that. She had to believe that, but the coldness didn't go away. Was having his own revelation. He commanded the human construction teams that had been rebuilding the Junction trade station. A meteor strike had destroyed half the structure, killing thousands and disrupting trade routes that connected 12 different sectors. The assembly had debated for months about whether to rebuild. The cost was high, the benefits unclear. Then they assigned the job to humanity and provided minimal resources to do it. And his teams worked for 8 months in hard vacuum, replacing destroyed sections, rebuilding life support, installing new docking facilities. They worked around the clock, in shifts that pushed the limits of human endurance. 3 workers died in accidents. Dozens more were injured. When the station reopened, it was better than before. More efficient, safer, with improved systems that would serve the region for decades. The assembly sent representatives to the opening ceremony. They praised the efficiency. They commented on the cost savings. They questioned why humans had wasted resources on aesthetic improvements that weren't strictly necessary. Aesthetic improvements, repeated to his second-in-command that night. We added gardens, places for people to rest. We made it livable, not just functional. They don't think that way, she replied. To them, space stations are just tools. They don't understand making them into homes. Looked out at the station, at the lights now glowing in corridors where there had been only darkness and death. Then they don't understand why anyone would want to live here. Reports began filtering back to Earth, carried by the regular supply ships that traveled between human space and assembly territory. The reports spoke of successes, of problems solved and lives saved. But they also spoke of something else. A pattern of indifference, of expectations without gratitude, of contributions taken as obligations rather than gifts. Read these reports in her office on the assembly station. She had remained as humanity's chief ambassador, the face of their species to the galactic community. She had learned to smile at condescension, to remain patient with dismissal, to accept that respect might take time. But 5 years had passed and respect hadn't come, only more demands. They want us to take over waste management for the core systems, her aide told her, bringing the latest request from the council. The company that handled it has gone bankrupt, and they need immediate replacement. Waste management said flatly. It's essential work. I know it's essential, that's not the point. She set down the report. We've cured diseases, we've defended colonies, we've built infrastructure, and they want us to take out their trash. It would help a lot of people. Everything helps someone. That's not the question. Stood and walked to her window, looking out at the massive station that represented galactic civilization. The question is whether we're partners or servants. Her aide didn't answer. They both knew what the answer was. In the Assembly Council chambers, the elder races met in private session. The topic was humanity, and the conversation was not about gratitude or recognition. It was about threat assessment. They control critical infrastructure now, one counselor said. The outer rim defense, the medical research networks, the construction operations. If they wanted to disrupt the assembly, they could. They haven't shown any hostile intent, another argued. Not yet, but they're young, ambitious, capable, too capable. The speaker leaned forward. They've risen faster than any species in assembly history. If this continues, they'll be challenging our authority within a generation. So what do you propose? We remind them of their place, firmly, before they forget they're provisional members, not equals. The vote was unanimous, not because all the elder races agreed, but because none wanted to be seen as weak by opposing the dominant view. That was how politics worked, even on a galactic scale. Fear of appearing soft outweighed fairness or wisdom. The humans continued their work, unaware that their success had become their crime. Jin defended colonies, researched cures, built stations, negotiated trade deals, and across assembly space, humanity made themselves indispensable. They thought this would prove their worth. They didn't understand that being indispensable to those who see you as inferior doesn't earn respect. It earns resentment. It makes you dangerous. It makes you a problem that needs to be solved. The invitation arrived with great ceremony. Held the ornate data crystal in her hand, watching light refract through its facets. The message it contained was simple. The Assembly Council requested humanity's presence at a grand session to acknowledge their contributions to galactic society. This is it, said excitedly. She was young, new to the diplomatic corps, still believing in the ideals that had brought humanity to the stars. They're finally going to recognize everything we've done. Was less optimistic. He had served in the Assembly Senate for 3 years, watching how the elder races operated. Maybe, or maybe not, we should be careful. Careful of what? They invited us to honor us, insisted. Set down the crystal. Is right. We prepare for the best but expect anything. This is galactic politics. Nothing is ever simple. They spent 2 weeks preparing, drafted speeches, compiled reports of humanity's achievements, researched protocol and precedent. They wanted everything perfect. This moment mattered. 5 years of hard work, of sacrifice, of proving themselves, it all led to this. The day of the session, the council chamber was packed. Every seat in the tiered rows was filled. Representatives from hundreds of species had come to witness this historic moment. Walked to the central platform with and beside her. She could feel thousands of eyes watching them. The 3 leaders of the elder races sat on their elevated platforms, exactly as they had 5 years ago when humanity first arrived. The same scaled figure, the same bird-like being, the same massive presence in the center. But something in their expressions was different. Harder, colder. The center figure rose. Its voice filled the chamber. We have called this session to address the matter of humanity. Straightened, this was it. 5 years ago, we welcomed your species with open arms. We gave you opportunities to contribute to our great assembly. We trusted you with responsibilities, despite your youth and inexperience. The words should have been positive, but something in the tone made stomach tighten. However, the figure continued, we have observed concerning patterns in human behavior, reckless expansion, disregard for established procedures, cultural contamination of other species. Blinked, cultural contamination. You have influenced other species with your methods, your attitudes, your way of thinking. You have disrupted the order that has maintained peace for 12,000 years. The scaled figure on the left spoke next. Human medical personnel have distributed treatments without proper approval from assembly health authorities. Human construction teams have implemented designs that deviate from standard assembly specifications. Human military forces have engaged in conflicts without authorization from the central command. We saved colonies from said, her voice steady despite her rising anger. We cured the blight. We rebuilt the junction. These weren't deviations, these were emergencies we responded to. Without permission, the bird-like figure said, you acted independently as if you were equals rather than provisional members. This cannot continue. The center figure stood fully now, towering over the chamber. Therefore, the Council has voted unanimously to change humanity's status within the Assembly. You will no longer be provisional members. You will be designated as a protectorate species, under the direct administration and supervision of the elder races. The chamber fell silent, heard gasp beside her, she felt go rigid. Protectorate status, repeated slowly, you're making us subjects, vassals. We are providing proper guidance for a young species that has proven unable to operate independently within assembly structures. This is for your own good, and for the stability of the assembly as a whole. The scaled figure began reading the terms. Human colonies would be administered by assembly-appointed governors. Human ships could only operate under direct supervision of assembly commanders. All human research would require approval before publication. Human trade negotiations would need council authorization. Every aspect of human activity in assembly space would be controlled, monitored, restricted. They were being put in chains, disguised as protective oversight. Listened to it all. She felt trembling with rage beside her. She heard its breathing grow shallow and controlled. She knew every human watching this broadcast back home was feeling the same thing: betrayal, anger, disbelief. When the reading finished, the center figure looked down at them. Do you understand these terms? Stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent chamber. I have one question. Proceed. Why? The figure tilted its head. We have explained. No, you've given reasons that are lies. Cultural contamination, reckless expansion. These are excuses, not reasons. I want to know why you're really doing this." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the scaled figure leaned forward and for the first time saw honest emotion on an elder race's face. Contempt. "Because you have forgotten your place," it said. "You were never meant to be equals. You were meant to serve. We allowed you into the assembly because we needed workers for tasks we no longer wished to perform. We gave you the difficult jobs, the dangerous jobs, expecting you to accept your role as the least important species. Instead, you excelled. You improved. You made yourselves necessary." The bird-like figure added, "That is your crime, not any violation of protocol or procedure. Your crime is being too capable too quickly. You threaten the order of things. This cannot be permitted." The center figure spoke again, its voice final. "So now we will ensure you remain in your proper place. You will serve the assembly, but you will do so under our control. This is not a punishment. This is the natural order being restored." Stared up at them. 5 years of her life. 5 years of humanity working, sacrificing, hoping that effort would be rewarded with respect. And now she understood. They had never wanted humanity to succeed. They had wanted humanity to fail and accept failure as their destiny. She looked at and saw tears on the young woman's face. She looked at and saw resignation in his eyes. He had suspected something like this. He had warned her. Turned back to the council. They waited for her response, for argument, for anger, for the dramatic confrontation they expected from these emotional humans. Instead nodded slowly. "I see," she said quietly. "We understand now." She gathered the data crystal and her papers. She turned toward the exit and stared at her in confusion for a moment, then followed. "Where are you going?" the center figure demanded. "We have not dismissed you. There are documents to sign, procedures to follow." Kept walking. Her footsteps echoed in the suddenly silent chamber. She reached the door and paused. Without turning around, she spoke one more time. "You told us to know our place. We do now. Thank you for the lesson." Then she walked out. The door closed behind them and kept moving through the corridors, her mind racing, and hurried to keep pace. "What are we doing?" asked. "We can't just leave. We have to fight this, challenge the vote, appeal to other species." "No," said. "But they're taking everything from us." Stopped, she turned to face her colleagues. "They took nothing. They showed us what we should have seen years ago. They don't want partners. They don't want equals. They want servants. And we're not going to be servants." "So what are we going to do?" asked. Pulled out her personal communicator. She encrypted a message and sent it to every human facility, every human ship, every human colony in assembly space. 3 words. "We are leaving." "Leaving?" Eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean we're going home, all of us, every human in assembly space. We're done." Started walking again. "They wanted us to know our place. Now we'll show them. Our place isn't here, serving people who see us as tools to be used and controlled. Our place is with our own people, building our own future." "They won't let us just leave," warned. "They can't stop us. We're not prisoners. Not yet anyway. And we're not breaking any laws by choosing to return to human territory." His expression was calm, but her eyes were hard. "They made it very clear we're not equals, so we'll stop pretending we ever were." The message reached human facilities within hours. Across assembly space, humans stopped what they were doing and read those 3 words. They understood immediately. The response was unanimous. Not because they were ordered to comply, but because they all felt the same way. They were tired of being taken for granted, tired of giving everything and receiving nothing but contempt in return. Admiral Jin received the message on the bridge of his flagship. He read it 3 times. Then he smiled. "Recall the fleet," he ordered. "All ships, all personnel, we're going home." The exodus had begun. The message spread through human communities like wildfire. Within 72 hours, every human facility in assembly space had begun evacuation procedures. No debates, no arguments, no questions about whether this was the right choice. Everyone understood. They had all felt it, that slow realization that their effort was being exploited rather than appreciated. Admiral Jin stood on his bridge and watched the fleet assemble. Every human ship from across the outer rim was gathering, preparing for the journey home. His officers worked with quiet efficiency, their faces showing a mixture of relief and sadness. "The defense platforms are online," his tactical officer reported, "running on automated protocols as you ordered." Jin nodded. The platforms had been humanity's gift to the Outer Rim, powerful defensive installations that protected dozens of colonies from raiders and threats. They were leaving them operational. They weren't saboteurs or destroyers, but they had configured the systems to run autonomously, with no remote access. "How long will they last?" Jin asked. "The power cores are good for 18 months, maybe 2 years. After that, they'll need maintenance. Specifically, the kind of maintenance only human engineers know how to perform." "And the colonies?" "They're asking us to stay, begging us actually." His officer looked uncomfortable. "They're saying they'll be defenseless without us." Jin had received hundreds of messages from colonial governors, from citizens, from people who had lived safely for 5 years because human ships patrolled their space. They didn't understand why the humans were leaving. The Assembly Council's decision hadn't been publicized. As far as most species knew, humanity was abandoning them without reason. "Send the same response to everyone," Jin said. "Tell them we're going home. That's all, nothing more. They'll think we don't care." "Let them think what they want." Jin's voice was harder than usual. "The people who made this decision are the ones who need to explain it, not us." Across the sector, human ships disengaged from patrol routes, from border stations, and began the long journey back to human space. They left behind 5 years of protection, of sacrifice, of doing the work others wouldn't do. And they left it all without a word of blame or accusation. On the research stations was overseeing the evacuation of her medical teams. Laboratory equipment was being packed, research data was being backed up, and personnel were boarding transport ships. Her assistant was crying as she packed her personal belongings. "We were so close to a breakthrough on the neural degeneration problem," she said. "Another 6 months and we could have saved thousands of lives." "I know," replied quietly. She felt it too, the pain of leaving work unfinished. "But we can continue the research at home." "It's not the same. We had access to genetic samples here, to their medical history, to patients we could help directly." "They'll have to help themselves now." A doctor approached them, his 4 arms ringing together nervously. "Please, doctor, reconsider. Your work here is vital. Our people need you." Had worked with this doctor for 3 years. They had been colleagues, maybe even friends. She had taught him techniques, shared her knowledge freely. Now he stood before her, desperate, and she felt nothing but emptiness. "The Assembly has made its decision about humanity's place here," she said. "We're accepting it. We're going where we're wanted." "But you are wanted. We want you here." "No, you want what we can do for you. That's not the same thing." She sealed the last container of equipment. "The blight cure is still available. The treatments we developed are all documented in the medical databases. You have everything we created. What you don't have is us continuing to create new things for free while being treated as servants." The doctor looked confused. "I don't understand. Did something happen?" Almost laughed. The Assembly Council had humiliated humanity before the entire galaxy, and most species didn't even know about it. They lived their lives, benefiting from human work, never questioning where it came from or why humans would keep providing it. "We're just going home," she said. "That's all you need to know." Engineering teams were leaving their fusion cores operational, but stripped of human expertise. The cores would run for months, maybe over a year, before they needed maintenance. And when they did, the Assembly would discover that freely sharing technology wasn't the same as freely sharing understanding. "The manuals are incomplete," one of his engineers reported. They cover basic operation but not advanced troubleshooting. I know, said. We wrote those manuals ourselves. We shared what we felt was appropriate. But when the cascade failures start, they'll need to figure it out themselves. That's how learning works. Watched as another transport lifted off, carrying human families back toward home. We solved their problems for 5 years. Time they learned to solve their own. Station after station fell silent as humans departed. Not dead, not destroyed, just suddenly empty of the people who had kept them running. The communications relays still functioned. The medical facilities still had power. The construction projects sat half-finished, skeletal structures hanging in space like monuments to abandoned collaboration. Looked at the junction station one last time before boarding his transport. He had spent 8 months rebuilding it, had lost workers making it safe and functional. Now he was leaving it behind. The station would continue serving the region. The assembly would benefit from his work, and he would never know if they even remembered who built it. Do you regret it? His second-in-command asked. All the work we did here. No, said. I regret believing they would appreciate it. The Assembly Council began to notice the exodus after the first week. Reports flooded in from across assembly space. Humans were leaving. Facilities were being evacuated. Fleets were withdrawing. And nobody could stop them because they weren't breaking any laws. They were simply choosing to go home. Emergency sessions were called. Delegates were dispatched to human facilities, demanding explanations, seeking negotiations. They arrived to find humans packing equipment, loading transports, and refusing to engage in discussion. You can't just leave, an official said to a human administrator at a mining facility. We have contracts, agreements, responsibilities. Our contracts are void under protectorate status, the human replied calmly. The council's decision made that clear. We're no longer independent partners. Therefore, our agreements no longer apply. But the mining operations will continue under assembly management. We're leaving all the equipment operational. You'll just need to staff it yourselves. We don't have the personnel. Then I suggest you find some. The human sealed another container. We're leaving in 6 hours. You have until then to assign replacement workers. Similar conversations happened across assembly space. Humans were polite but firm. They were leaving. Period. No negotiations, no compromises, no amount of pleading or demanding would change their minds. Some assembly officials tried threats. Human facilities were surrounded by security forces. Orders were issued demanding humans remain at their posts. The humans refused. They walked past the security cordons with their belongings, calm and unhurried. What were the security forces supposed to do? Open fire on unarmed civilians who were legally choosing to leave. That would shatter what remained of the assembly's moral authority. It would prove everything humanity wasn't saying out loud about being treated as slaves rather than partners. So the security forces stood down, and the humans kept leaving. After 3 months, the evacuation was nearly complete. Only a skeleton crew of human diplomats remained on the assembly station, coordinating the final transports and handling administrative details. Was among them, supervising the shutdown of the human embassy. The ambassador wants to speak with you, reported. She's asking why we're doing this. Tell her we're going home. She knows that. She wants to know why. Looked up from her work. Because we're not wanted here. Not as partners, not as equals, only as tools. And tools don't have feelings, don't have dignity, don't deserve respect. But we do, so we're leaving. Should I tell her that? No, just tell her we're going home. Let them figure out the rest themselves. The last transport left assembly space 6 months after walked out of that council chamber. 6 months to dismantle 5 years of presence, of contribution, of believing they could earn respect through effort. The speed of the departure shocked the assembly. They had expected negotiations, expected humans to fight for their place, expected drama and conflict. What they got was silence and absence. Humans simply left, taking nothing that wasn't theirs, destroying nothing, sabotaging nothing. They just stopped doing the work that nobody else had wanted to do. And in their absence, the assembly began to understand exactly how much they had been doing. The defense platforms in the outer rim started showing warning signs after 8 months. Minor malfunctions, efficiency drops, power fluctuations. Assembly engineers tried to fix them, following the incomplete manuals humanity had left behind. Some problems they solved, others got worse. The fusion cores began failing according to predictable schedules. Stations lost power. Emergency protocols activated. Assembly engineers studied the designs, tried to replicate human solutions, and slowly realized that what humans made look easy was actually incredibly complex. The medical facilities lost their edge. The treatments humanity had developed were still available, but new diseases emerged, new challenges arose, and there was nobody innovating solutions anymore. The gap between having cures and discovering new ones became painfully obvious. And in the outer rim, the colonies waited nervously, watching their sensors for threats they knew might come, protected now only by aging automated systems, and the hope that the assembly might finally care enough to defend them. Back in human space, life continued. Ships arrived carrying exhausted personnel who had spent months evacuating. They came home not in triumph but in quiet relief. They had left behind their work, their achievements, and any hope that effort alone could earn respect from those who had already decided you were beneath them. Stood in her apartment on Earth, looking up at stars that had once seemed to promise unlimited possibilities. Now they just looked distant and cold. Somewhere out there, the assembly was discovering what they had lost, but that wasn't humanity's problem anymore. Not unless the assembly learned to ask properly. Not unless they learned that respect must be mutual, or it isn't respect at all. The silence between human and assembly space grew deeper each day. No messages, no contact, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just absence where presence used to be, and empty spaces where humans used to work. 2 years had passed since the last human ship left assembly space. 2 years that changed everything. The return to the outer rim in force. The automated defense platforms detected them early, fired according to their programming, and were overwhelmed within days. The swarms were larger this time, more aggressive, perhaps sensing that the defenders were gone. 7 colonies fell before the assembly could mount a response. The elder races dispatched their fleets, ships that had been designed for show rather than sustained combat. The crews were trained in theory but lacked experience with actual warfare. The outer rim had been protected for 5 years by humans who knew how to fight, who cared enough to learn every trick and tactic that worked against the. Without that knowledge, the assembly fleet made every mistake Jin's forces had learned to avoid. They positioned ships wrong, used weapons inefficiently, failed to rotate crews before exhaustion set in. They killed millions before the assembly finally drove them back, not through skill, but through overwhelming numbers and resources they could barely afford to commit. The victory was hollow. 7 colonies were gone. The death toll was catastrophic, and everyone knew they would return. They always did. Without proper defenses, without the human fleet that had kept them at bay, the outer rim was vulnerable in a way it hadn't been in years. The fusion cores failed according to their predictable schedules, but faster than expected. Assembly engineers had tried to maintain them, had followed the manuals and applied fixes that sometimes worked and sometimes made things worse. The cores were complex systems that required intuitive understanding as much as technical knowledge. Humanity had that understanding. The assembly didn't. Station after station went dark. Not all at once, but steadily, a slow cascade of failures spreading across assembly space. Emergency power kept life support running, but everything else shut down. Trade slowed. Communication became unreliable. Colonies that had relied on steady power for everything from food production to medical equipment suddenly found themselves rationing energy and hopping for repairs that never came. Received reports from assembly space through unofficial channels. Engineers desperately trying to understand human technology, failing, requesting help through intermediaries who knew humans wouldn't respond to official assembly communications. He read the reports and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sympathy, just tired acceptance. "They're suffering because we left," one of his engineers said. "Doesn't that bother you?" "They're suffering because they never bothered to learn what we were doing for them," replied. "We shared our knowledge freely. They took it and never asked questions, never tried to understand the principles behind the technology. They just expected us to maintain it forever while treating us like servants. We could help them. We could, but why should we?" The engineer had no answer for that. The plague came next, a mutation of the blight that had warned them about 3 years earlier. She had told them the cure was effective against the current strain, but that the disease could mutate, that they needed to maintain research, develop new variations of the treatment. They had nodded, acknowledged her warning, and done nothing. Now the mutation spread through colonies like fire. The old cure was ineffective. Scientists tried to develop a new version, but they lacked expertise, her understanding of how to track and predict the disease's evolution. They spent months chasing solutions that didn't work while millions died. Heard about it through medical journals that still circulated between human and assembly space. She read the reports of failed treatments, of researchers pursuing approaches she could have told them wouldn't work. Part of her wanted to help. The doctor in her saw suffering and wanted to stop it. But another part, the part that had been dismissed and taken for granted for 5 years, felt only cold indifference. "They have the cure formula," she told her assistant. "They have all our research. If they can't figure it out from that, more free information from us won't help." "But people are dying." "People were always dying. They just didn't notice when we were the ones saving them." The trade routes collapsed when the relay stations went offline. The consortium had built their entire economy on just-in-time supply chains, moving goods across vast distances through a network of communication nodes that kept everything synchronized. Those nodes had been maintained by human technicians who understood the subtle adjustments needed to keep signals clear across interstellar distances. Without those adjustments, the relays degraded. Signals weakened, became corrupted, failed entirely. The supply chains broke down. Colonies that had relied on regular shipments of food and medicine suddenly found themselves isolated, their storage depleting, their people facing starvation. They tried to rebuild the old system of slower, independent trade routes, but it took time they didn't have. Famine spread across space. The assembly sent relief, but coordination was difficult without reliable communication. Ships arrived at colonies that had already descended into chaos. Others never arrived at all, lost in space without proper navigational updates. The Assembly Council met in emergency session. The grand chamber that had once been filled to capacity now stood half empty. Many species had withdrawn from active participation, pulling back to their own territories to deal with their own crises. The unity that had held for 12,000 years was fracturing under the weight of accumulated failures. "We need to discuss the human situation," the scaled counselor said. Its voice lacked the contempt it had carried 2 years ago. Now it just sounded tired. "The problems we're facing, they all trace back to humanity's departure. They abandoned us," the bird-like counselor said, but without conviction. "No," the center counselor spoke heavily. "We pushed them away. We made them protectorates when we should have made them partners. We took their contributions for granted, assumed they would continue serving us indefinitely without respect or recognition. We were wrong." The silence that followed was profound. Admitting error was not something the elder races did easily. Their authority had been built on the assumption of wisdom and superiority earned through age and experience. Acknowledging that they had made a catastrophic mistake challenged the foundation of their power. "What do you propose?" the scaled counselor asked finally. "We ask them to return." The vote was unanimous, but for different reasons than 2 years ago. Then, they had voted from pride and fear. Now they voted from desperation and humility. They needed humanity. The assembly was collapsing without the steady contributions of people who saw problems and fixed them without being asked, who cared about strangers enough to work themselves to exhaustion protecting them. The delegations were assembled with care. The assembly sent its most respected diplomats, representatives from species that had worked directly with humans and remembered them with genuine fondness. They crossed the border into human space expecting armed defenses, expecting demands for reparations, expecting humanity to extract payment for the pride the assembly had wounded. Instead, they found something far worse than hostility. They found indifference. Earth and its colonies were thriving. Without the constant drain of supporting assembly operations, humanity had poured resources into their own development. New stations orbited their worlds. Research facilities expanded. Trade flourished between human colonies. They had returned to their own space and simply continued building, growing, advancing, without the assembly, without needing the assembly. The delegation was received politely at Earth's diplomatic station. Met them, having taken over from as humanity's chief diplomat. She was courteous, professional, and completely unmoved by their presence. "We appreciate you making the journey," she said, gesturing to a conference room. "How can we help you?" The head delegate, with kind eyes who had genuinely respected the humans he had worked with, spoke carefully. "The assembly is facing serious challenges. The infrastructure that humans maintained has been failing. The defenses you provided are gone. We need help." "I see," said. "That sounds difficult." "Yes, which is why we're here. We're asking if humanity would be willing to return to assembly space and resume your previous roles." "Our previous roles as protectorates, you mean?" The delegate flinched. "That decision was a mistake. The Council acknowledges this. We would welcome humanity back as full members with complete rights and recognition." Nodded slowly as if considering. The delegates leaned forward hopefully. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but final. "No. But we appreciate the offer, truly. But humanity has moved on. We're building our own civilization now, our own future. We don't need the assembly anymore." "This isn't about need," another delegate interjected. "This is about compassion. People are dying because of infrastructure failures. The outer rim colonies are defenseless. They are suffering from plague. Doesn't that move you?" "It does," admitted. "Human nature is to help when we see suffering, but helping someone who treats you as a tool rather than a person isn't compassion. It's enabling abuse. We learned that lesson. We won't repeat the mistake. We're offering full membership, equal status, recognition. You're offering those things now when you need us. 2 years ago, when we needed respect, you offered subjugation." Its expression remained kind, but her eyes were hard. "Do you understand the difference?" The delegate tried again. "I worked with Doctor. She was dedicated to helping people. Would she really turn her back on the plague victims?" "Doctor is currently developing treatments for human diseases that we never had time to research because we were too busy solving assembly problems. She's helping people, just her own people now." And Admiral Jin, he cared about the outer rim colonies. Would he abandon them? Admiral Jin defended those colonies for 5 years while being paid less than assembly military officers of equivalent rank and being the recognition they received. He didn't abandon anyone. The assembly abandoned its own colonies by refusing to defend them properly and expecting humans to do it for free forever. The delegates tried every argument they had prepared. They appealed to humanity's compassion, to shared history, to the mutual benefits of cooperation. They offered trade deals, technology exchanges, positions of authority within the assembly structure. They promised respect, recognition, equality. Listened to it all patiently. When they finished, she stood. I understand your position. The assembly is suffering, and you believe humanity could alleviate that suffering. You're probably right. But here's what you need to understand. We don't owe you our help. We gave freely for 5 years and were repaid with contempt. That debt is settled. You taught us that effort without respect is exploitation. You taught us that capability without recognition is servitude. You taught us that we should value ourselves even when others don't value us. She walked to the window, looking out at Earth hanging in space. We're not coming back. Not because we're angry, not because we want revenge. Simply because we've found something better here. We're building a civilization based on mutual respect, on genuine partnership, on the belief that all work has value and all contributors deserve recognition. So you're just going to let the assembly collapse? A delegate asked desperately. We're not letting anything happen. We're not involved anymore. That was your choice when you made us protectorates. We accepted your judgment. We knew our place just like you told us to. Our place is here with people who value us. The delegate stood, his 4 arms spread in a gesture of pleading. Please, reconsider. If not for the assembly, then for the innocent people who are suffering through no fault of their own. Turned to face him. For a moment, genuine sadness crossed her face. I'm sorry, truly, but humanity learned a hard lesson about the cost of being taken for granted. We won't teach that lesson to our children by returning to those who refuse to value us. The assembly made its choice. Now it has to live with the consequences. She gestured toward the door. Your ships will be for the journey home. We wish you safe travels. And we hope the assembly finds solutions to its problems, just not solutions that involve exploiting people who deserve better. The delegation left Earth empty-handed. They tried other approaches, contacting humans who had worked in assembly space, appealing directly to individuals who might be swayed by personal connections. They all received the same answer, delivered with the same polite finality. We're sorry, we can't help you. We're not coming back. The messages continued for another year. Desperate pleas, angry demands, guilt-laden appeals. Humanity responded to none of them. The border between human and assembly space remained open. Humans had no interest in conflict or revenge, but no humans crossed it. The silence was absolute. In her apartment on Earth, tended her garden. She had retired from diplomatic service, had no interest in ever dealing with the assembly again. Sometimes she thought about the people suffering in assembly space, the colonies falling to the plague victims, the children starving as supply chains failed. It hurt. She was human, and humans felt compassion for suffering. But she didn't regret leaving, because staying would have meant accepting that humanity's worth depended on being useful to those who despised them. It would have meant teaching human children that dignity was less important than being needed. It would have meant betraying everything their exodus had stood for. The assembly had wanted servants. They had gotten partners instead and hadn't known what to do with them. So they had tried to force partnership into servitude. And humanity had shown them that you can't force respect, you can't compel gratitude, and you can't make someone value you who has already decided you're beneath them. The most powerful response to such treatment wasn't war or revenge. It was simply walking away and building something better elsewhere. It was succeeding without those who had tried to keep you down. It was thriving in their absence and proving that you never needed them as much as they needed you. Years would pass. The assembly would eventually stabilize, though it would never recover its former glory. Some species would learn the lessons humanity had taught through absence. Others would continue to blame humanity for abandoning them, never understanding that you can't abandon those who pushed you away. And humanity would continue forward, building their civilization on principles learned through painful experience. That respect must be mutual. That contribution deserves recognition, and that knowing your place means knowing your worth. They had walked away without words or warnings, and in that silence they had said everything that needed to be said.